"Don't touch the flag." 3 words spoken with quiet intensity by a royal guard as an airport manager attempts to redirect a fallen soldier's final journey home. What happened next silenced an entire terminal. In the collision between military protocol and airport chaos, Sergeant Edward Winslow stood firm. The draped flag represented more than fabric. It symbolized the ultimate sacrifice his friend had made. Where others saw a logistical inconvenience, Winslow saw sacred duty. As airport staff prioritized schedules and efficiency, he refused to compromise the dignity owed to a fallen soldier. His unwavering stance transformed a routine transfer into a powerful reminder for hundreds of strangers about the true cost of freedom. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to hear more untold moments that deserve to be remembered. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear your voice in this global conversation. Sergeant Edward Winslow stood like a pillar of scarlet against the polished floors of Heathrow's Terminal 5. His breathing, measured and controlled, barely disrupted the perfect lines of his Royal Guard uniform. Every button gleamed, and every crease aligned with military precision, his white-gloved hands resting at his sides exactly as regulations demanded. In his stillness, he became both visible and invisible, a splash of tradition amid the modern bustle that some travelers photographed while others rushed past without a second glance. 3 kilometers across the sprawling airport complex, Richard Barnes jabbed at his tablet screen with manicured fingers. The operations manager's office walls displayed framed certificates of efficiency awards and management excellence. Digital screens tracked departures, arrivals, gate assignments, and most importantly, to Barnes, on-time performance metrics. His current streak of 97.4% on-time departures had become his obsession. "Daniels," Barnes called sharply, "why is Terminal 5 showing amber status for the 14:30 rush?" He turned back to his screens without waiting for a response. "We've got 19 departures in that window. We can't afford disruptions." Daniels cleared his throat. "It's the military transport arrival, sir. The honor guard procession will cross through the main concourse at approximately 14:15. Barnes's jaw tightened. His fingers drummed an aggressive rhythm on the polished desk. 17 minutes of operational disruption during peak hours. He adjusted his tie. "Why wasn't I informed earlier? The service corridors exist precisely for this reason." While Barnes calculated minutes and disruptions, Winslow's mind drifted to 3 days prior. The commanding officer's office, the folded paper with official letterhead, the words that had made his stomach drop, "Lieutenant Matthew Henshaw, killed in action." And then the assignment. "You've been selected for escort duty, Sergeant, bringing him home." Where Barnes saw statistics, Winslow carried the weight of brotherhood. The airport's intercom announced another departure as a child's excited voice pulled Winslow back to the present. "Mummy, look! A soldier!" The little boy pointed, eyes wide with wonder. The mother smiled apologetically as she hurried past, but Winslow remained motionless. He had stood guard at Buckingham Palace for 8-hour shifts without flinching. Today's duty demanded nothing less. Barnes paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand the protocols, but this is a major international hub, not a parade ground. Can we at least expedite the transfer?" Digital chimes from gate changes punctuated his words. "I've got 3 connecting flights with over 400 passengers who could miss their transfers." The wall display chimed with a notification. Barnes glanced up to see a military transport had just been cleared for landing. "Look," he continued, "I respect what they're doing, but surely this military thing could be handled with more operational awareness." In the arrivals hall, travelers began to notice Winslow's presence. An elderly veteran nodded respectfully. A group of teenagers whispered. A businessman slowed momentarily, then checked his watch and rushed on. The airport's announcements continued their monotonous litany, creating a discordant backdrop to Winslow's solemn tableau. Barnes briefed 3 staff members as they walked briskly toward Terminal 5. The service corridors connect directly to the vehicle loading area. It's more efficient and won't disrupt 400 paying customers. The military can have their ceremony at the cemetery where it belongs. But sir, ventured a junior staff member, the airport director approved the main concourse route. This airport runs on precision timing, not pageantry, Barnes interrupted. The procession will be redirected. Outside, the military transport touched down, its wheels meeting English soil with a puff of smoke. Inside lay a flag-draped casket containing Lieutenant Henshaw, no longer a person, but a final mission for his friend. As Barnes strode through the airport, his mind filled with schedules, while across the terminal, Winslow stood guard with thoughts of promises made under distant stars. One man saw disruption where the other saw sacred duty. Their collision course was set. Beneath Winslow's crisp scarlet uniform lay a heart bearing the weight of more than duty. His fingers brushed against the weathered photograph tucked in his breast pocket. Two young soldiers with arms slung around each other's shoulders, their faces bright with the invincibility of youth before Afghanistan taught them otherwise. The creases in the photo told of countless times it had been unfolded, studied, and carefully returned to its place close to his heart. The image captured a moment 7 years earlier when neither he nor Matthew Henshaw could have imagined where fate would lead them. Their first meeting during basic training had been anything but friendly. Henshaw, cocky, outspoken, from a military family stretching back generations, clashed with Winslow's methodical, by-the-book approach. Their drill sergeant purposely paired them together, recognizing their opposing strengths might forge something greater. "You think too much, Ed," Henshaw would say during night exercises, his voice carrying through the darkness. "Sometimes you just have to feel it." Initially, Winslow scoffed at such advice, but as weeks passed, their rivalry transformed. Respect grew during grueling training exercises, admiration followed in tactical simulations, and by deployment, an unshakable brotherhood had formed. Afghanistan tested them beyond anything training could simulate. In the barracks, Henshaw became the heart of their unit, his laughter providing relief from perpetual tension. Winslow remained in the background, quietly observing, always calculating. "You're my compass, Ed," Henshaw told him during a rare quiet moment, stars impossibly bright above their outpost. "I may lead the charge, but you're the one who makes sure we're heading in the right direction." The words settled into Winslow's chest, becoming part of him. Their third tour changed everything. The ambush came without warning, routine patrol transformed into chaos within seconds. Winslow remembered the sound more than the sight. Gunfire, shouts, and Henshaw's voice cutting through it all. "Ed, on your left!" Henshaw tackled him to the ground as bullets tore through the space where he'd been standing. 3 seconds that created a lifetime of debt. That night, as medics treated their injuries, Henshaw brushed off thanks. "That's what brothers do," he'd said simply. But something in his eyes had changed, a recognition of mortality that hadn't been there before. During subsequent months, Henshaw spoke more about home, about his father Thomas, who had served in the Falklands, about his young niece Emma, who sent crayon drawings addressed to Uncle Matt the hero. He carried her artwork folded in his helmet, a talisman against darkness. The classified operation came 3 years later. The night before deployment, they sat outside their barracks, premonition hanging between them. Winslow felt the rough texture of the bench beneath his palms, memorizing his friend's profile against the fading light. "If anything happens, Ed, bring me home proper," Henshaw said, his usually animated face serious. "No service corridors or back exits. The full procession, the way it should be. Dad would want to see it done right." Winslow felt the weight of those words as he nodded. "I promise. The full honors, through the main concourse. No matter what." 3 days later, the notification came. Lieutenant Matthew Henshaw had not returned from his mission. Details were sparse, classified. Winslow stood alone in the barracks afterward, his hand pressed against the photograph in his pocket, feeling the edges worn soft from handling. The promise echoed in his mind, no longer hypothetical but painfully real. Standing now at Heathrow, Winslow's mind returned to the present, as the transport plane taxied toward the terminal. His face remained composed, betraying none of the memories flooding through him. The photograph pressed against his chest reminded him of what bound him to the casket soon to emerge. This was about a promise made under distant stars, a debt of honor that transcended regulations and timetables. The aircraft door opened with a mechanical hiss, marking the moment when private grief would collide with public protocol. In the sterile world of airport operations, where minutes equaled money and disruptions weren't tolerated, the solemn ceremony about to unfold represented more than an inconvenience. It challenged the very hierarchy of what deserved priority in a bustling transportation hub. The honor guard emerged first, their movements measured and precise. When the flag-draped casket appeared, its stars and stripes standing in stark rebuke to the terminal's utilitarian gray, airport ground crew members immediately removed their caps and bowed their heads. Barnes alone remained unmoved, tallying the mounting delay on his watch. Winslow positioned himself beside the casket, his scarlet uniform like a flame against the terminal's cold efficiency. His training allowed him to maintain perfect composure as the bearers lifted Lieutenant Henshaw's casket. The procession began its slow march toward the main concourse, each step deliberate and dignified, challenging the frantic pace pulsing around them. Barnes approached before they reached the terminal doors, clipboard clutched like a shield. "Sergeant," he said, voice lowered to a theatrical whisper, "I've prepared an alternative route." He unfolded a map pointing to a highlighted path. "These service corridors will take you directly to the pickup area." Winslow's response came without hesitation. "This is Lieutenant Matthew Henshaw of the Royal Marines. We will proceed at the appropriate pace for escorting the fallen." Barnes leaned closer. These corridors were designed for movements that shouldn't disrupt the main terminal operations. Shouldn't disrupt? Winslow's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. "Lieutenant Henshaw will be escorted with full honors through the main terminal as arranged." Travelers began to cluster at the fringes. A businessman pocketed his phone. A mother whispered to her curious child. A flight attendant stopped mid-stride. The tension drew attention like a current. Barnes jabbed at the map. "This service elevator leads directly to the loading area. You'd avoid disrupting thousands of passengers. The disruption is temporary. The dishonor of skulking through back corridors would be permanent." Barnes's composure cracked. He signaled security. "This is absurd. Airport protocols supersede your parade." Security Officer Isabel Chambers approached, her hand resting on her radio. As she reached them, her eyes fell on the casket where sunlight from a nearby window caught the fabric of the flag, illuminating its colors against the sterile backdrop. Her hand dropped from her radio. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Yes," Barnes said. "We need this procession redirected for security reasons." Chambers looked at the casket, then at the onlookers who had paused their journeys. Something shifted in her expression. "Sir, the airport director approved this route. I don't see a security issue that would justify overriding that." Barnes flushed. "I'm responsible for terminal operations. These delays cascade through the entire system." The crowd had grown larger now, their collective silence creating a pocket of reverence in the busy terminal. Against this backdrop of respectful attention, Winslow finally spoke. "There are regulations that long predate your airport protocols. They govern how we honor those who gave everything in service." His quiet authority made several onlookers straighten unconsciously. Lieutenant Henshaw died serving his country in full view of the world. He will not be hidden away in death. Chambers stepped back, positioning herself closer to the honor guard, a subtle choice of allegiance. Barnes looked around at the dozens of travelers watching, their faces reflecting recognition that they were witnessing something that transcended inconveniences of delayed connections. When Winslow signaled the bearers to continue, Barnes stepped directly into their path, one hand raised to physically halt the procession's advance. In that frozen moment when Barnes's hand extended toward the flag, time seemed to collapse. The crowded terminal, the delayed flights, the business of everyday life suddenly insignificant against the invisible line he was about to cross, one that would awaken something ancient and unyielding in Sergeant Winslow's carefully controlled demeanor. The operations manager's fingers made contact with the edge of the Union Jack, the fabric rippling beneath his touch. A collective gasp rolled through the gathering crowd, traveling outward until the entire terminal held its breath. Children pointed. Business travelers lowered their phones. The airport's usual noise faded to silence. Winslow moved with a fluidity that belied his rigid stance. His hand closed around Barnes's wrist with a grip that communicated absolute certainty without excessive force. His movement reflected years of training, muscles responding to a violation so fundamental that his reaction bypassed conscious thought. "Don't touch the flag," Winslow said, his voice barely above a whisper yet carrying through the hushed terminal. The words delivered with the quiet authority of someone stating an immutable truth. His eyes, meeting Barnes's, conveyed what his restrained words could not, that this transcended mere airport protocol. It struck at the very heart of military honor, a boundary so sacred that even the most disciplined soldiers could not allow it to be crossed. Barnes's face registered shock, then indignation. His authority, unquestioned throughout his career, had been physically restrained. Blood rushed to his face as he found himself immobilized before hundreds of onlookers. "Take your hands off me immediately," Barnes hissed. "This is assault on airport personnel. I'll have security escort you out and press charges." The terminal's atmosphere had transformed. Travelers who moments before had been frustrated by delays now formed a loose semicircle around the tableau. An elderly man removed his cap and placed it over his heart. A flight attendant wiped a tear from her eye. A businessman slowly closed his laptop. What Barnes failed to grasp was that touching the flag covering a fallen soldier's casket was a grave act of disrespect, a violation of military protocol, and a profound breach of human decency. To military personnel like Winslow, this was a desecration, an insult to Lieutenant Henshaw, his family, and everything the soldier had sacrificed. Winslow maintained his grip for 3 seconds before releasing Barnes with the same economy of movement. The sergeant's face betrayed nothing, but veterans in the crowd recognized the depth of restraint being exercised. What civilians witnessed as composure, they recognized as the suppression of a deep sense of betrayal. The flag represents the soldiers' dedication, the values they upheld, and the ultimate sacrifice they made, Winslow explained, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath his professional exterior. "It is not to be touched by anyone outside the honor guard." Barnes rubbed his wrist, his expression caught between embarrassment and defiance. "This is still my terminal," he insisted, voice lowered. "And I determine how. Military personnel are authorized to protect the flag and the casket from desecration," Winslow cut in with finality. "Our actions are guided by established protocols that predate both your position and this airport." The silence around them had taken on a reverent quality. Travelers stood motionless, many with heads bowed, as if suddenly aware they stood on ground that had transformed from commercial space to something approaching hallowed. Barnes's certainty wavered as he surveyed the unified response of the crowd. The impact of his action was written across dozens of faces, a collective understanding that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. A path cleared as Martin Cranford, the airport director, approached with measured steps, his expression grave as he surveyed the scene. The honor guard in formation, Barnes standing awkwardly, the casket becoming the physical center of this unexpected standoff. "That's Uncle Matt's flag," came the small, quavering voice from the edge of the gathering crowd. Emma Henshaw's tiny finger pointed directly at the draped casket, her innocent words slicing through the standoff like lightning through storm clouds. The child sat perched in her grandfather's arms, her face a mirror of confusion and sorrow that belied her young years. Director Cranford surveyed the scene with experienced eyes, recognizing a rare moment when rules suddenly seemed hollow against the weight of human sacrifice. He saw Thomas Henshaw standing rigid at the terminal's edge, the family's grief now intertwined with this public confrontation. The older man's weathered face bore the marks of someone who understood sacrifice, his arms protectively cradling Emma while his eyes remained fixed on the flag covering his son. Cranford stepped forward, his decision crystallizing. "Mr. Barnes," he said quietly but firmly, "please step aside." The authority in his voice left no room for argument. Turning to Winslow, his tone softened. "Sergeant, please accept my apologies. Your procession will continue through the main terminal as planned." Barnes began to protest, clutching his clipboard, but Cranford silenced him with a raised hand. The director recognized what Barnes couldn't see, that some moments transcend operational metrics, that traditions carry a weight no efficiency report could measure. Cranford reached for the terminal announcement system, the ambient noise in the terminal seeming to hush in anticipation. His voice echoed through the vast space. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? A fallen soldier is being escorted through our terminal today. As a sign of respect, we ask that you join us in forming a corridor of honor for his final journey home." The terminal transformed. Travelers who had been rushing toward gates suddenly stopped and moved deliberately to the edges of the concourse. Business travelers closed laptops mid-email. Parents gathered children close, whispering explanations about sacrifice. Airport staff abandoned their posts, forming lines along the path. The chaotic terminal became a solemn passage. Where minutes before had been cacophony, now stood two perfect lines of silent witnesses. A businessman who had been complaining about his delayed connection now stood with head bowed. A teenage girl slipped her phone into her pocket, her eyes wide with newfound understanding. Veterans among the crowd stood out by their bearing and precise salutes. An elderly man in a wheelchair struggled to his feet, supported by his wife, his trembling hand finding its way to his brow in a gesture of brotherhood. 3 uniformed military personnel snapped to attention as if on a parade ground. Barnes watched as his calibrated terminal operation halted, a river of stillness flowing through the usually frantic space. The realization dawned across his features. Efficiency sometimes must bow to humanity. His eyes moved from his watch to the scene before him, something fundamental shifting in his understanding. Emma leaned forward in her grandfather's arms, her small hand opening and closing as if reaching for something invisible. Thomas held her tighter, his jaw working against emotions he wouldn't release. The procession resumed, moving through their corridor of respect. Not a word was spoken, not a phone raised. Even the terminal announcement seemed to have fallen silent, as if the building itself held its breath. Sergeant Winslow's face remained impassive, yet something in his eyes had changed. Acknowledgement that his stand had awakened something powerful. As they proceeded, Winslow's gaze met Thomas Henshaw's across the distance. No words were exchanged, none needed. In that glance passed a world of understanding. Promise kept, honor maintained, sacrifice recognized. Thomas nodded once, a soldier's acknowledgement from one generation to another. The hearse pulled away from the terminal, carrying Lieutenant Henshaw on his final journey home. Sergeant Winslow's salute held steady until the vehicle disappeared from view, his posture unwavering despite the emotional weight of the moment. What began as a bureaucratic standoff had transformed into something profound. A reminder that certain traditions endure because they address our fundamental need to acknowledge sacrifice with dignity. Some things can't be scheduled, Winslow thought, watching civilians return to their routines, forever changed. In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight caught the folded flag, the terminal stood as hallowed ground where humanity remembered what truly matters.